Hello there, sword friends. Today I just want to talk a little bit about an event that I went to called Icebreaker 2022, and it is a HEMA event. And as many of you know, and I have mentioned numerous times whenever I review a European-style sword, I don't study historic European martial arts, but it was a chance to go out and see some HEMA practitioners swing swords around, and even though I don't know how to do it, I'm still enamored by the spectacle of it. So I went and I watched some of the tournament going on. I got to visit some of the booths, and I just thought I'd talk through some of the observations of a non-HEMA practitioner, and also encourage you, if there's ever an event like this in your area, totally worth going out even if you don't practice. At the particular one I went to, they welcome spectators, so I could come in. I asked ahead of time if it was okay if I came in and took some pictures and stuff like that. Anyway, there was some cool things that I noticed about HEMA that I don't see as much in Japanese style swordsmanship practice, and I thought I would just run through and talk about it and comment a little bit. One, you can really feel when you go to these events like why the protective padding and stuff is there. There are some spots that don't look like they have a lot of covering on them, but those blades move quick and it looks like they hurt. So I would not be terribly surprised if there are some broken fingers and some bruised arms and joints and things like that. There's a lot of headgear and all the vitals up here protected, and I also I know that they're padding, and I also just want to mention that everyone was pretty serious about safety. If anyone noticed that like a mask was loose or that something wasn't fit right, they'd make a loud noise and jump in and try to make sure that the combatants and the practitioners and people there were safe, and that was really cool to see. But with all the safety in check and with everyone being mindful, it still looks like it hurts. The sound that I'm capturing here probably doesn't convey it well, but there's a thud that you hear sometimes that it makes you kind of cringe a little bit when there's a really good strike that comes in. Plus those helmets, I imagine that it must be really loud inside because there's some strikes to the head and some things that come pretty loud, and I imagine your bell gets rung pretty loud inside some of those helmets. But likewise, you wouldn't want to put in earplugs or something like that because you couldn't hear judges make calls and things like that, but I imagine it probably gets pretty loud inside those things because they are striking pretty fast and pretty hard. Anyway, it was a really cool event. The things that I noted, it looked like it was a bit on the honor system. I don't know the judging, how it works and whatnot, but I want to try it. What I noticed in terms of movements, though, were a lot of things happening on the high guard. That was something that I noticed predominantly in just about every bout. It would end up kind of high as opposed to taking place lower with lower thrusts and things like that. A lot of times the swords would bind together, and I noticed a lot of use of the, I don't know what that chunk on the ricasso is called. There's a name for it and it's escaping me at the moment, but they use that pretty effectively to bind swords and control the opponent's sword and try to go over and deliver a thrust, or sometimes a small cut, but typically a thrust as they were bound and kind of reaching over and controlling the other person's sword and trying to move their point into the body for a thrust on the hip or the chest. And pretty often one would be delivered, though often it would end in a kind of a mutual touch at the same time. But I noticed that a lot of people were playing high, and I'm not quite sure how they got there. I tried to fixate and watch how it escalated. It seemed like people would go into the bind and then it would go high rather than low or mid. A lot of them went that direction, which isn't something that I can say I understand necessarily why go high versus low or stay in the middle, but that seemed to be where a lot of people gravitated to. And as a person that doesn't practice or even talk to people that practice it that much, it was just an interesting nuance to notice, as where it's not something that I see or do as much in the other styles of swordsmanship that I've practiced. The other thing that would happen is somebody would start low, and there was a lot of little flicks, and I don't know if I caught any of them on video, but some folks were really, really graceful with this and would just come up and pop and snap somebody in the wrist with the sword. And it was pretty delicately done. I remember when I was in fencing many years ago, getting poked in the hand and the wrist with very, very competent epee fencers. And it reminded me a little bit of that. There would just be this, goading somebody in, kind of lowering your guard, encouraging them to come in high, and then backing up and flicking the sword up and smacking them in the wrist. And there were quite a number of points garnered in that way, or at least a number of touches. I don't know if there were points because I didn't take time to learn the rules. But I digress. I thought that this was some pretty cool stuff. I was really impressed with the amount of control that happened up high. I saw it kind of happen time and time again, but people were using that little ricasso area to bind the sword and push. Presumably, if your sword didn't have one, then you would be able to use your crossguard to do something very similar. It also does make me wonder, this looks like a really fun activity. It does make me wonder what's lost in the bind, because so many things in these bouts happen on a bind. What's lost in translation by not having a sharp edge? Because obviously they're pretty squared off, blunted things for safety. But when you have a sword, and so much of the art involves binding and pushing pressure against another opponent's sword and kind of moving the sword up, controlling it with what area you can, but your blades aren't sticking together. You don't have a sharp edge that's either biting into your opponent's sword, gouging into your opponent's sword, and then being kind of offering some level of control because they're stuck together. Anyway, I don't know what's lost there. Now, obviously, in some of my shenanigans in my backyard, I have smacked swords together, and I've pushed them around, and I've done some binding exercises with sharp blades on sharp blades, and they certainly do bind in. If you have a differentially hardened blade or something soft, you can not cut into the spine, but you can damage the soft spine with a harder edge and dig in and bind and control it and push with certain parts of your sword. I don't know how effective that is when another person's trying to swing one at you, or frankly what happens, because the exercises I've done with sword-on-sword contact with sharp swords has predominantly been with a sharp sword taped to a post or something like that, not one that's being swung at me actively. So how that changes things, I do know that there is something there. There's certainly something about how two sharp swords interact when they make contact with one another, but I don't even know that any of the experience I have is applicable to two human beings swinging at them with deadly intent or even competitive intent. Anyway, the Icebreaker event, I only went there for the longsword day. It was cool. There were a bunch of different bouts happening. It seemed like a really good group of folks. There was a lot of awesome technique and stuff on display. I don't necessarily know what it is, but I could certainly witness it happening and try to take some stuff away. I thought it was really cool to see. And again, I was really impressed. I'm glad that I was there when somebody wasn't being safe or their helmet wasn't necessarily attached. And I remember a rather burly gentleman making a big loud noise and stopping and helping his a competitor from another school get their helmet attached to make sure everything was safe, right? So it looks dangerous. It is dangerous. It's probably easy to get bruises and broken fingers and the like, but everyone seemed to be on the right standpoint, that they all want to have they're all in good spirits and trying to look out for each other as well, and I saw that too. So anyway, it was Icebreaker 2022. If you're in the Minneapolis area, apparently it's a HEMA event that's been going on for some time, and I just didn't know about it. Nathan from Arms and Armor posted a video where Arms and Armor had donated a sword as the grand prize for the tournament, and that's how I heard about it, and I was glad I got to go take some photos. Anyway, if something like this exists in your area, I highly recommend it. I don't study HEMA at all. I do still think swords are cool, and I really enjoyed even going there for a few hours just to see the spectacle of it. There was a lot of different things, and it made me want to go and study HEMA, frankly. If I had the time and ability to, I want to go swing long swords at people. It looked really cool. Anyway, that's all I got. It's not really much to say, just some odd little nuances. If you study HEMA and can critique on why so many of the bouts went to high guard in a bind, or if you've done sword-on-sword contact with another person, hopefully safely, and can comment on what's lost or in the bind, and if those techniques are still applicable or if they're not. I'm kind of curious about that. If a lot of what we see, or a lot of what I was seeing in the modern kind of sport tournament area of HEMA, would be lost if it were in fact a sharp sword, if people would fundamentally have to act differently. I suppose it could be both directions. I don't really know. Anyway, cool stuff. I was glad I saw it. Hopefully the video footage is interesting, if nothing else. Thanks to Icebreaker for letting me come and take photos and make blabbery stuff on the internet about it. Cheers to all the combatants. Hopefully the winners and losers of the tournament all had a good time. I really enjoyed watching. That's all I've got, though. Cheers, and thanks for watching.